Started. Hello to everyone joining us today for our Water and Climate Showcase event. My name is Benita Matthew, the Program Manager of waterNEXT here at Foresight, and I'm happy to welcome you to our quick 1-hour webinar. It's with gratitude and respect that we acknowledge that the lands on which Foresight operates are in the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I myself am calling from Ottawa, the land of the Algonquin people, and I will be making a few introductions shortly. Just to give a quick overview of our agenda, we will be highlighting our partner Xylem in this call, along with kickstarting a panel discussion with 4 fantastic water ventures doing some amazing work in climate mitigation and adaptation. And then a quick few closing remarks. Just a quick overview of Foresight. Our goal is to get Canada to be the first G7 country to reach net zero, and to accelerate the transition, we need to rapidly launch and commercialize and scale climate solutions. So we're working with a fantastic bunch of companies from all across Canada to make that happen. And a quick run through of waterNEXT. We are Canada's water technology network, and we bring together stakeholders from across the water innovation ecosystem to build on that acceleration and commercialization of those technologies all through Canada. I'm going to hand it over to our director of waterNEXT, Alan Shapiro, to make an introduction, as well as chat a little bit about our Climate and Water Toolkit. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks, Benita. Well, really grateful to be joining everyone here today. I know our numbers are still creeping up here, which is okay because no one needs to hear me speak, but everyone should be here for our panel as we get started. So I am joining you from New York today, as I know Bree is as well. We're here for the UN Water Conference, which is a big deal for a couple of different reasons. First of all, it is World Water Day tomorrow. And so this is our opportunity as a water community to get together and celebrate our successes, and also recalibrate for some of the challenges that are still front and center for us. Number 2, it is the first proper UN water conference in 45 years, which is maybe a statement on the fact that we should prioritize water a little bit more highly, but also a chance to dig into the Sustainable Development Goals around water, and particularly Sustainable Development Goal 6 around water and sanitation access. And number 3, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released their latest report yesterday, for anyone who hasn't followed that announcement. And so the intersections between water and climate, I think, are more important than ever before, both in understanding where water policy intersects with climate policy, where water management intersects with climate adaptation, and also where water solutions relate to climate challenges overall. And so that's the topic that we're here to talk about today. I wanted to introduce a little bit of the work that Foresight has done through our Climate and Water Toolkit. There's a lot of work that's been done in the water and climate intersection space. And so we're not here to push the envelope on the science or the research. There's some great resources. Xylem is one organization that's released a couple fantastic reports in this space. But what we've seen a lack of is resources to help support water tech ventures in telling their climate story. This is something that we've seen uniquely through our network. We've now got a network of 70 water tech ventures across Canada working on a range of different challenges. But one shared challenge is that in Canada, water does not crack our top 3 environmental priorities. This is different around the world if water scarcity is front of mind, perhaps, or flooding is front of mind. But in Canada, if you're pitching investors, or if you are looking at partnerships or pilots, you're asked to tell your climate story, whether that is your adaptation linkage or your mitigation linkage. And so we found that across our network, a lot of water tech companies naturally have very strong climate value propositions, but might not have put the work in making that connection. And so the Climate and Water Toolkit linked here, we identified 7 value propositions for water tech ventures, 4 on the mitigation side, 3 on the adaptation side, and then drew a range of action pathways and water tech applications just to connect the dots. So where might water treatment fit, or companies like Rainstick on the call today that are working on, water scarcity through water use recycling in the home. Um, where is their climate story? And so we're here with four of our favorite companies to help feature them and tell their stories a little bit and understand and dig in a little bit to this water and climate intersection, but also more broadly, just to highlight the fact that this is something we will continue to work on. Our commitment at the UN Water Conference is to accelerate 500 water tech ventures between now and 2030. So that's a lot of heavy lifting. And those ventures for us are focused on water and climate and on circular water. And so we're really digging in to see where are water solutions supporting climate adaptation and mitigation. So hopefully this is the first of many webinars and programming that we can offer in this space. Back to you, Benita.
Thanks so much for that quick introduction, Alan. And now over to one of our partners. We collaborate with a number of partners, and in this case, thanks to NRC IRAP, through which this event has been made possible to do so. We'd love to give a great shout out to them. But over to Xylem, and for us to hear from Brianne Nakamura, who's an innovation analyst and is currently in New York. Brianne, over to you.
Thanks so much, Benita. We're really happy to be here, and Xylem is really happy to be a partner of waterNEXT. For those of you who aren't familiar with Xylem is a global water company. We have over 17,000 employees in over 150 countries. And really, we do everything from transport, treat, and track and analyze water throughout the water ecosystem. For us, sustainability is one of our core, everything that we do. It's fundamental to our strategy, to our mission, and to our culture, which is why we're so passionate about climate change and at events like today, but also at events like the UN Water Conference, like Alan mentioned this week. Sustainability and innovation really go hand in hand in terms of driving one another and connecting the dots into why entrepreneurs are entering the water space and why we feel like it's so important to help with the acceleration of water technology adoption within the water space. It's always crazy to me that when we talk about water innovation, everyone thinks back to these big treatment or hardware applications, and the fact that water adoption can take up to 10 to 15 years, which seems absurd. I am in my 12th year of being in the water industry, and there are some technologies that still haven't even been proven in that time. So for us here at Xylem Innovation Labs, our mission is to really help drive the growth of innovation by promoting a culture of innovation, both internally at Xylem, but also within the water industry. And we're doing that by partnering with external entrepreneurship companies and groups, some of which are on the call today. And doing that through a couple of different programs. We know as a global company and a large company, we have the opportunity to provide lots of resources and introduce startups to our customers as a way to kind of enhance our profile, but also to help accelerate the adoption of technology here in the water industry. And so we do that in a couple of different ways. Our flagship program that we have that some people might have heard of is our commercial accelerator. And that's really to help accelerate commercial path to market for later stage startups and companies with a goal of long-term commercial partnerships, whether that's white labeling or looking at different ways that we can distribute that technology. We're really trying to look at the relationship between large companies and startups differently, so that it isn't such a David and Goliath like scary kind of idea, and that it's more of a collaboration and a partnership. That's one thing I think we've really noticed here in the water space recently is, everyone, especially being at a water conference right now, the water industry is a really small, kind of very homey family. There's a lot of intersection, and it doesn't make sense that we aren't always working together or looking at ways that we can drive the industry towards that. So for us here, we're really excited about partnering with groups like waterNEXT and utilizing that as another way to kind of extend our funnel and help companies along their water journey and along their startup journey. In terms of climate change, for us, water change is climate change, and it's something that we look at. We not only are looking at companies all the time that are specifically in this water space, but we're also looking at companies that are water adjacent, coming from other industries and, affecting the whole circular water economy as a whole. We're doing that through some of our partnerships that we do with, different venture capital companies, but also different accelerators and groups like waterNEXT that we work with to really expand and find out what's happening in the ecosystem. So We're super excited to hear from our panelists today. We are pretty familiar with some of them. And really looking forward at ways that we can help drive climate change and water change at the same time. So I will pass it back to Bonita.
Thanks so much, Brianne. And without further ado, we'll kickstart the panel. A quick introduction of our wonderful panelists today. We have Alicia McFetridge from Rainstick Shower, Jeff McAllister from Pani Energy, Patrick Keeley from Sentry, and Doug Laird from Livestock Water Recycling joining us today to chat on our panel. And I will hand it over to Alan to kickstart it.
Thanks, Benita. So we're taking a page from the book of our friends at Mazarin Ventures and trying to keep things active and dynamic and bouncing around. And so this is the only question that we will ask to all four panelists. And after that, we will try to ping pong it back and forth. So if you as panelists have thoughts on other panelists' comments, feel free to riff back and forth. If anyone in the audience wants to throw a question in the Q&A, please do so. And let's try to keep it as active and dynamic as we can. But at least for now, would love just a quick snapshot from each of the panelists today. Tell us a little bit about your company and about your technology. Doug, maybe if you can kick it off for us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us today. This is obviously a very important topic, and it's at the heart of our business. Livestock water recycling, our technology and systems. We handle livestock manure. We turn manure into reusable water, concentrated transportable fertilizer. We turn manure into carbon credits and fuel for renewable natural gas. So we're really excited about a lot of the advancements we're able to make with our systems, particularly as manure can be up to 70 or 80% of water. And we need to get that back into use on sites, possibly back on land. And sometimes it goes back into local waterways and stuff. So we have to be very careful about how that is propositioned and positioned, excuse me. But we have 20 plus operating systems in the US alone, and we look forward to growing our footprint. Our goal of treating 1 trillion gallons of manure by 2050 is alive and well and keeps us well within the 10 of the UN sustainability goals. And that's again at the heart of what we do here.
Thanks, Doug. Who wants to jump in next?
I'll jump in, Alan. So my name is Jeff McAllister, and I work for a company called Pani Energy. And at Pani, we develop technology products that empower facilities to do more than less. We do this by the creation of digital tools that help facilities monitor and optimize their facility performance through capturing essentially the power of AI through a digital layer we call process operations AI. And that translates to value in a number of ways, including lowering operating costs, lowering risks of non-compliance, and enabling facilities with the ability to monitor and make informed decisions that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, which is the component I'm particularly passionate about and translates to a mission that we announced at COP27 last year, which is our aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the water treatment sector by 510 megatons per year, year on year from 2032.
Perfect. Hot potatoing it over.
Great. Well, hey, everybody. Very nice to be here. And thanks again for the invite. My name is Alicia, and I co-founded a company called Rainstick to solve some of the problems that we have in the residential space. Current point in time, a North American uses approximately 300 liters of water. 50% of that water use happens in the bathroom. And so we decided to do something about it. We actually started at super fitting with International Water Day in Canada's only desert region, the Okanagan Valley. So that's where I am right now. And our first product is Rainstick Shower, which is a shower appliance that saves 80% water and up to 80% energy while providing double the flow rate. And so we're able to do that by point of use, by using that drop up to 6 times and then cleaning that water in real time.
Awesome. I'll go next. Last one.
Have at her.
Awesome. I'm hopeful my internet connection, by the way, is stable. This is hotel internet. I am very worried. Patrick Kiley, CEO of Century. I'll throw a few numbers at folks first. So 1 to 3% of all global electricity is used to treat and move water and wastewater. Across Canada, from the numbers that we see, typically about 25% of the electrical bill of your typical community is actually spent at the wastewater treatment plant, delivering oxygen, primarily air, to wastewater at the wastewater treatment plant, which is an insane number. I don't think anybody appreciates that. If you were to say that a quarter of everyone's electricity from a community level is actually going to treating wastewater, I don't think anyone would believe that. And the reason that this happens is because there's no good data. There's no good data in wastewater. There's no good way of measuring how clean or dirty wastewater is. And that's what we've solved at Century. So we've developed a new type of sensor platform that measures how clean or dirty wastewater is. And we provide this typically as a service.
I love chatting with companies that have well-rehearsed pitches. I feel like I expected this to take more time, but it never does because everyone's so disciplined. So let's dive into maybe the climate solution side of things. And Benita, I'll hand it over to you for next question.
Yeah, so perhaps we can kickstart, what each of you kind of think the role of water technologies is in when it comes to climate solutions, and more in detail, perhaps around the mitigation focus. Pani and livestock water, your focus is more on the climate value proposition on adaptation versus, on mitigation versus Century and Rainstick, which has more of a focus on adaptation. Perhaps you can start there.
Sure, I can take a crack at it if you like. So we in terms of mitigation, we do have three things we do. Obviously, as part of our name, we love to recycle water. Gets used back on, again, the sites and in other back on land, etc. Agriculture does use a significant amount of water, especially when it comes to livestock. We also, in terms of climate mitigation, we also enable dairies, farms, etc., to produce either concentrate up that manure for fuel for RNG. Therefore, it's not going into a lagoon to off gas in a traditional manner, and then get spread 3 or 4 times a year. So we allow them to capture the volatiles that are in manure and put those to good use, or they can do that from a renewable natural gas perspective, or we have a dairy in Washington State generating carbon credits, or to be generating carbon credits, excuse me, in the near term here, because they're no longer putting that manure into the lagoon and off gassing. And the third and somewhat obvious as well, what we do is we help manage nutrients from a farm dairy site. Obviously, a huge issue with water across the globe is nitrogen runoff, etc., from various forms, and we help better use of that manure as a concentrated and precision fertilizer, excuse me. So in our solids sit most of the phosphorus, in our liquid fertilizer most of the ammonia. So they act differently, and farmers and dairies and crop growers can use those type of products at different times of year to help their crop grow. So we're not only helping mitigate some of the runoff issues, etc., that come with just having to empty lagoons when they're full for farmers and others, and there's lots of rules around that, and our food growers are amazing, so they do the best they can, but we also allow those nutrients to go back in the soil, which the regenerative process of putting nutrients and microbes, etc., back in the soil is a big climate change driver. So we'd love to see those fertilizers go further afield. We're often competing with a crop grower's fertilizer that comes on a boat from somewhere else. And we'd love to see that there's a bigger growth in that market. And there certainly have been programs both federally in Canada and the US that are moving towards that. And we applaud that. So we look forward to being part of the and water solutions on many fronts.
Thanks, Doug. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, so something that we're looking at the moment is how do we decouple water from carbon? At the moment, we have two, I guess, global factors that are in direct tension. The first being that our water demand is increasing, and not as it increasing, but as our readily available freshwater resources decrease, we need to use higher treatment technologies to generate safe, secure, and affordable drinking water for our citizens. The second is being that we have a need to decarbonize all our sectors, and particularly our water sector, and where I work, the water treatment sector, if we are going to prevent global warming as it's happening at the moment. Currently, the water treatment sector is responsible for about 3% of global emissions, and we believe that doesn't need to be the case. So in working with facilities, what we're seeing is that many facilities, they understand the need to decarbonize, and that's across the sector, be they industrial, food and beverage, or municipal utilities. But these may, and some of them actually have 10 to 30 year targets, but there's limiting understanding on how to get there. Many treatment plant operators and facility owners see decarbonization as a little bit of a compromise with respect to more immediate drivers like cost and compliance. And as a measurement and decision support tool, we want to demonstrate that these don't actually need to be the case. Quite often when you're looking at things like the reduction of consumables, driving down costs and reducing greenhouse gases associated with chemicals and energy often go hand in hand. So we not only want to show them what's possible, but use digital technology to accelerate their path forward and empower them to actually get there.
Thanks both. We're going to keep it on the mitigation side for a second. I promise, Pat and Alicia, that we'll give you a chance to dive in. Doug, you mentioned carbon credits. Can you unpack that a little bit for us in terms of, that's a very interesting value proposition that you're bringing to some of your clients. Tell us where that started for you and how that's evolved. I know it's still obviously a very early conversation in an early market.
Yeah, so we're, again, we have a dairy in Washington State, and we are looking to help others out in the same regard. The primary goal of installing one of our systems and our technology is to manage A, the volume of manure, B, the nutrient separation and reuse, and C, often is a water issue. Sometimes dairies, believe it or not, have too much water on the site, and they need to move things around. So where carbon credits or voluntary carbon credits came into the picture is just like Jeff mentioned, we capture data through our systems. You can't reduce or mitigate what you can't measure. And so we, through that ability to capture the flow through of the system, we can give a great idea of what is not going into a traditional lagoon. So one of the real motivating factors for us is whenever we get installed, just like everyone else's technology, we have to have ESG goals and water goals are front of mind for everyone, but it has to bring multiple sources of value or cost reduction at the site for the farmer, the renewable natural gas developer, etc. And this is now just another great option for us to be able to continue with our goals, and always the farmers and dairy goals are very much aligned too. Our food producers are under a whole bunch of pressure to make more with less, urban growth, etc. They're feeling the pressure in a lot of ways. So not only can carbon credits that get approved by a third party and will go through a very well-known and regulated exchange, we expect them to be sold probably up through the dairy value chain up to a consumer packaged goods company. But it allows the farm dairy not only to have another source of revenue, frankly, to help with the operations of the system and on farmer dairy, but goes obviously towards some of the longer term climate goals that, again, our farm and dairy partners are often very, very well aligned with.
Thanks, Doug. And that like multiple sources of value piece, Jeff, that obviously carries over into the water treatment sector space as well. Can you kind of speak to the maybe distinct angles of value or different value propositions concurrently that Penny is bringing to water treatment facilities?
Sure thing, Alan. So as I mentioned, when you're looking at kind of measuring and optimizing the performance of your plant, there are a number of different value pieces that can be captured, and some are more immediate and some are a little bit longer term, and some resonate more with some facilities than others, and that's a byproduct of sort of the type of facility they are, where they operate. Somewhere like the Middle East, where water is quite scarce, is going to be looking at the cost of water and the value of water and the mitigation of water, or the prevention of water loss, a little bit differently than somewhere like Canada that may be have that fresh water at least superficially available to them, but something like reducing costs on the labor front may resonate quite well. But at Pani, what we are looking at is really how those things are all interrelated, right? If you can have a more efficient process in the immediate term, you may be driving down your costs either by consumables or energy, but that steps down longer term into things like greenhouse gas reduction. Inevitably, if you are using less chemicals, you are using less energy in your dosing pumps, et cetera, but you're also importing less chemicals. That trickles down to kind of scope 2 and scope 3 emission reduction. And the same goes for running a more efficient system. When you're having less washes, less backwashes, you're bringing down that water as well. So we're really trying to join those up, recognizing that those different value props will resonate differently with different audiences or different facilities with different needs, but ultimately all steps up to that long-term goal, which is really driving down greenhouse gas emissions and getting us to a position where we can bring down our year-on-year CO2 emissions to a point that's in line with a sustainable future.
Thanks so much, Jeff. Benita, we'll hand it back to you to interrogate our adaptation angle, folks, and maybe we can turn the screen share off as well. So
Yeah.
Wait a second, can I jump in there before we do that?
yeah, please do.
Awesome. So Jeff, you mentioned it briefly, incentives.
Yep.
And there's just two things I'd like to comment on. So there's one, incentives, and then there's the level of complexity. Like, it's so complex, the water industry, and all, like you talk about scope 1, scope 2, most people are already lost as soon as you say that. And then on top of that, we start talking about CO2, we start talking about electrical demand, we start talking about N2O, NO2, like we start talking about CH4. It's so complex, but on the incentive side, the operators of typical water or wastewater treatment facilities are in no way incentivized ever to save energy. And a lot of the people that we're selling to and talking to are the operators. So there's a puzzle there that we as an industry have to figure out, is who is actually, whose salary or whose bonus, because we're all simple people, who is actually incentivized to save energy at a wastewater treatment plant. And sometimes it's not even the person at the wastewater treatment plant at all, not even the manager, not the operator. It might be someone outside of that, like in the mayor's office. And sometimes they don't even know about then you have people in that office who have no idea that there's even an opportunity to reduce their energy or savings at the wastewater treatment plant. So I just think there's something that sometimes we're missing in the industry when we're being too focused on, well, this is where we solve the problem, but the people there don't actually really care because they're not incentivized to solve those problems. Anyway, I just want to add that in.
Yeah, I agree with you, Patrick. We see that in some of the larger corporates and things like that, where there's a disconnect in, not a disconnect in goals, but there is a disconnect in incentives or priorities, if you will. And that person at site has to keep running, has to make money, meanwhile, water's disappearing around them. But they still need that piece, technology or system to instantly add value, and then we'll get to the corporate goals of environment and water, et cetera. So it's a tricky balance. We see it in certain verticals for sure.
I'm not sure how that impacts you, Jeff, because I know a lot of your business is selling optimization and selling value. So I don't know who you're actually selling to. Like, who is it on your side actually gets a bonus if they implement this platform?
That's exactly true. And yes, quite often, we will work with facility owners that might have a portfolio of 8 to 10 plants and, love the idea of driving down this cost in the long term. But ultimately, then you get down to implementing it at the plant level, and compliance might be a much bigger driver. So, yes, it would be great to, tweak the set point, et cetera. But at the end of the day, what matters to them is they're not having compliant discharges. So, what does it actually mean for them? And that's where that balancing act comes from. And that's where we look at those 4 metrics. There are definitely more, but packaging up to something that's simple can create immediate value. Because really, if we're going to get to a point where we can transition towards a sustainable wastewater and water treatment sector, we're going to have to not only roll out quickly, but at the scale needed to bring down that kind of 1% of global emissions needed to bring us in alignment with a 1.5 degree world.
Sorry, I'm going to just jump in again, because there's another thing you said there, Jeff, which also makes no sense when we think about it. Reducing emissions. So the first thing is, can we save energy at the plant? Okay, can we save energy? The operator doesn't care. So already you have to go up the ladder. Then you talk about ESG, GHG, which is good, ESG, which is less, in terms of just how people understand it, is less intuitive. Mm-hmm. So you're going up the ladder of people who actually, who give a shit. And you have to go right to the top, or almost to the board, that's actually being implemented. So yeah, there's something about metrics and how we measure success in these organizations that I think is maybe just lacking. I don't know how and as a company, as an industry, we have to somehow present our value maybe a little bit more clearly then to each of those people along the level. Because certainly, if you say ESG, or if you say some environmental metric, the operator doesn't care, the manager doesn't care, because none of their bonuses or none of their salaries are actually tied to any of those benefits. So I don't know how far up you have to get on that ladder for someone to actually really give a shit.
It's interesting. I can talk not so much from that industrial or wastewater scale, but from some of the challenges that we face with Rainstick is the fact that we always call it a balance, or we call it a 3-legged stool, because you're not just selling into the homeowner, but you also need to sell into the installer. If it's a net new construction, it's the developer, it's the builder, it's the plumber, there's the electrician. And so, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of people that are part of it, and who really, using bad slang, who gives a shit? And, trying to find the people, and how do you, take net zero? I think one of the challenges also that I always have is the fact that so many times when you're talking about net zero, it's linked to energy. But automatically people think about the energy reduction, which it is, but people don't think about how closely water is tied to carbon. And so one thing that I would love to see more of is people referring to net zero, not just being net zero energy, but also net zero water. It's a thing. And how do we do a good job of talking about that? In our case, we look at the journey of water. Water touches the skin for a second when you're showering, it goes down the drain, it goes, into a reservoir, and then it, goes through a channel, and then the wastewater treatment process, which is incredibly carbon intensive, just to retreat that water back to, that was lightly soiled in the first place. So are there ways that we can mitigate that? But then also in an adaptation perspective, there are ways that we're going to have to adapt, and maybe to answer the question, Benita, around adaptation and how we're doing that at Rainstick, I would say there's one part of mitigation effort, and that's, what we're doing. It's the energy efficiency. And so I feel like in a lot of ways I can identify with the mitigation. But then also on this other side is how do we encourage folks to adapt encourage them either through, new construction methods, new shower methods, how do we talk to the people that need to be spoken to in the case of wastewater or more industrial treatment, and be able to really tell the story of what we need to do. And with RainStick, we're encouraging folks to adapt with our technology through offering a way better showering experience. And so, the only lever that we've pulled today is lowering the regulated flow rate. And so, we can only go so far before we force compromise to people. Because of all of these consumers, we always want more, we want greater, we want better. And so with RainStick, we have provided a 3 gallon per minute flow rate. And so you're going to get a way better showering experience than just getting a low flow shower. And so, I think certainly we go down to trade shows in Florida and people want to purchase a RainStick system, not because of the water and the energy, but they want to buy it because of the way better showering experience. And I think if we, come up with those drivers and like, what is that pain, then I think that that's going to be incredibly important. I mean, Bree talked about the fact that it's 12 years for typical water innovation to really start to get to the laggards and to properly for us to innovate. I'm now saying, how do we do that and cut that time? And, what sort of levers do we really need to be able to pull in order to do that? So that's maybe a few thoughts.
Thanks so much, Alicia, for delving into that. Just to quickly move on to the next focus, what kind of climate impact measurement and other environmental indicators do you see are important for water tech startups? You can maybe speak a little bit on to your own companies, but I'm sure our audience would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it earlier, but they said the only way that we can properly mitigate is if we know how much we're using in the first place. And so I think it's incredibly important for water startups to be able to track that information, knowing how much the use is or the savings, and then being able to report that appropriately. So in our case, we do that. We track water and energy savings. We're working on more of a larger level API integration. So that's with the property managers to be able to track that water and energy savings data from a central console. But I would say as far as that's probably the first place to start. And number two is, internally, you can start to build in some of your own tracking measurements and looking at what you want to review on a quarterly frequency or how often your board meeting is, and add that to your values, but also what you're tracking against. But I think, everybody wants data, but nobody knows what to do with data. And so making it super simple so that we can make effective decisions.
I gotta agree with you on that. I think it is quite a challenge, but those that are kind of figuring out better ways of showcasing that data, so it's a bit easier to understand, kind of go quite a long way. Perhaps I can throw Jeff into the mix if you'd like to give some input on that.
Yep, I guess I've spoken a few times, but the one that we're focused on is greenhouse gas emissions in terms of CO2 equivalents. But obviously, that's sort of our long-term drawdown. We have drawn that big ambitious goal at 2032. So what that means sort of in the short term. So at the moment, what we're looking at is greenhouse gas emissions under measurement. So as I mentioned, rapid deployment and adoption is a huge factor in us being able to get up to that goal. So as we begin to work with facilities, the very first step that we put in place on that decarb journey is simply measurement. We call it stage 0 in a ZERO 4-step pathway. And essentially what we look at is, yes, as we are helping them sort of optimize their processes, how much GHG, what is currently their emissions across those issues, what are they currently producing? And that's, I guess, the first step in us being able to find a really tangible step forward and where they can get those immediate benefits, but what that could lead to long-term in terms of reducing those emissions down.
Doug, Patrick, perhaps you'd like to?
Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, again, it's so complex. Like from even a wastewater treatment process or plant right now, you have CH4, you have the scope 1, scope 2, you have like N2O emissions. They're all weighted differently. Are they even being measured accurately? So for sure, you have to measure what matters. Focusing on CO2, focusing on electrical demand is a tricky one, because then also we have this other problem with water where we're adding all sorts of other nasty chemicals that are going to require extra levels of treatment. So this cost to providing clean water, there's an energy cost to that. You don't just generate clean water by doing nothing. It's going to take energy. And I don't think we can always be saying, oh, it's energy neutral clean water, or driving these costs down to a certain point also kind of shoots ourselves in the foot. Like we have to explain to people, no, if you want clean water, it costs energy. And the more and more nasty stuff we start putting into water, it's going to require more and more energy on the back end to treat it. So I think maybe just that part of it as well, explaining that it's just so complex. That's what I'm trying to get at, I guess.
Yeah, I echo everyone's thoughts on it. Is a complex matter. I go back to some Alicia's comments about that whole idea in behavioral economics, the nudge, is you have to get people you present them with the best option in their interest, but it has to have a carrot with it rather than a stick, and it goes a much longer way. So, for our systems, again, we promote the benefits from an economics point of view, because our clients are obviously aware of the environmental pressures their businesses have and sometimes often increase in a certain area, but a lot of them can't move. So they've got it's not, you don't just pick up a dairy and move it down the road, because there's probably another dairy of 10,000 cows just down the road. So it's complex, but I think from a measurement point of view, we're all getting better at that. But how we use the data and then how we incent people is not necessarily through guilt, but it's like the old first time I saw in a hotel room, I don't know how many years ago, saying, don't use so many towels. I forget what the language was, but or you don't need housekeeping every day. I like not to get. I thought, oh, yeah, I guess I don't. So you don't like. There's changes that benefit the business and the environment that are simple. We just need to find creative ways to remind them, or that there's another benefit to having a great shower. Another benefit to having milk that has less GHGs, attached to it for likely the same price. Unfortunately, so there are those cost pressures across all these industries, as Patrick mentioned, that it does have a cost, but we have to obviously promote the value.
Doug, to riff on that quickly, there's a question for you in the Q&A around how does livestock water impact the potential mandate for farmers to reduce use of fertilizers in reducing greenhouse gas emissions from ammonia production. Can you speak to that at all? Yeah, well, we capture the ammonia in our liquid stream. We capture organic nitrogen in both, but also in our solid stream that goes along with the phosphorus. And so it's a big push in the ag industry, and the USDA put out a call this year they had up to 500 million earmarked for Made in America fertilizer. And minimum grants to different sites and projects were going to be $1 million. So not inconsequential amount of money to get producers that can produce a fertilizer up and running. So the agriculture community is has been using fertilizer for hundreds of years. There's no incentive or there's no goal to be able to move it further afield where it's needed. That's the problem. There's a big concentration of dairies, let's say in Wisconsin, but your neighbor doesn't need your manure fertilizer. The guy in Fargo, North Dakota, 4 hours away, who grows crops, could probably use it. But so there's a disconnect in terms of obviously cost there, and
we're always promoting with our sites, and then larger local and national fertilizer producers on how we can connect that value chain. It's tough though, so there will be more. Unfortunately, incentives are needed to break the logistical challenges, but we do see a massive opportunity to reuse those natural components. And again, back to soil health, it's a great thing for the soil. It can't be used everywhere. We have to get to different sorts of standards and things like that. But in terms of ammonia, it's a big part of that nitrogen flow through a dairy or a livestock operation. And we do our best to capture it and reuse it. Some systems will put on ammonia scrubbing of some sort, et cetera, to capture more in the liquid stream. So there is a value there. And we're slowly, but unearthing it, and we're not the only ones. Our industry in general is focused on reusing these nutrients and putting value on it.
Thanks, Doug. We've got Indra in the chat, and Indra wants to talk a little bit about incentives broadly. So I might broaden this question and just say, like, taking economic incentives out of it, and that's one that's already we've tackled in a little bit of detail. Let's talk about pressure points in the system, and we wanted to get sort of towards this over the course of our panel, which was, look, technology is a piece of the puzzle, but we've got some systems change issues here when it comes to water. So would love to hear folks' perspectives. Broadly speaking, what are some of those pressure points, and what are some of the incentives that we can use in pushing towards those changes? Well, Jeff, if you want to take it away.
Explain that again. Me about points. I don't know what you mean by that.
Sorry, Pat, you're cutting in and out a little bit, but I got the gist. You were saying, to explain a little bit more, I was just saying pressure points for systems change. So if we're looking at Sustainable Development Goal 6, we're talking more about water access and sanitation, or Alicia brought up the net zero water focus of we just need to start talking about how do we conserve water and how do we treat less water. And so what are some of the broader changes that we need to see that aren't just focused on technology acceleration and adoption? Alicia, go ahead and riff on that.
I'm happy to start in, and then feel free to jump in, guys. I think for us, I can speak very specifically to some of the work that we're doing. I think there needs to be this focus. I mentioned it very briefly before that net zero doesn't mean energy. It also means everything that's encompassing. So water as well. And we should all talk about net zero water and use the term net zero water in building. And Alan, I saw that Foresight is now doing something with respect to net zero. I saw a couple of days ago in my email inbox. So let's do more of that. There needs to be more with water ventures. I think that we're constantly looking at risk. The water industry is always looking at risk. It's typically the technicians, they want to make sure that there's no risk to quality. They want to make sure that people are safe. And so trying to really push through innovation, there's a lot of levers there, both from, our need to succeed as a business. We need to push, and increase adoption. But then there's also a lot of barriers when it comes to water with how do you keep people safe? I think, for us, as far as incentives, how do you create products that really pull your demand? So through the experience, we're also being able to, have that data available to you. I think monetary incentives are a big thing. If we look at subsidies for net new technologies, in our case, Rainstick, in the States, for example, we were at a panel, this was last month in California, and, unbeknownst to us, I didn't even know this at the time, but they're already now doing a recirculating shower review. They've compared gray water against recirculating showers, and they found that there's the same the same water savings. And recirculating showers now also save that additional energy, but then they also have a payback period. And so that is attainable for builders to align to, especially with the higher water and energy costs. And so, looking at that and being able to pull new technology and innovation in. I mean, we just saw the IPCC report come in, and one of the #1 drivers is going to be government. What's the role of government? How are we pushing new technology in? And so, you know, as far as incentives, it's all about experience. It does come down to cost. You know, but I think that it's that innovation curve. You have the early adopters initially, or the innovators and the early adopter, then the early majority. And how do we really jump into that and do it much quicker, I think is always the challenge. But, you know, in our case, it's also getting the innovative folks that are the innovative builders, people that are willing to try something new, but also working with the governments that are also more innovative. And there are those in the water space. There's only a few, but there are those, and, you know, starting there and then starting to look at how we can spread the technology much quicker than that 12-year typical gap.
Interesting. Thanks for that, Alicia. Does anyone else want to jump in?
I'll just say from Canadian companies have a particular hurdle sometimes when it comes to incentives for innovation, because we often design our technology here, look around and say, well, okay, we've got lots of land and water, so there isn't a natural pressure right away, and we have to go to the US or abroad, which I think we've all done, to prove the technology, and then someone in Canada finally buys it. So whereas if I'm thinking about competition in the US, there may be the state incentives, federal incentives, et cetera, that sometimes aren't necessarily available for Canadian companies. So there's a different playing field in terms of incentives, and they do get complicated. But it's obvious you have to incent people to change their behavior. That's the way it is. It's either regulation or incentives, because we're all busy in our lives, and how do you change behavior if otherwise it just doesn't seem to work.
Great. Just going off of Doug's point, another question that we can kind of point towards our panelists is on the Canada versus global perspective, and how water ventures impact story and their value proposition changes based on geography. How do you see that kind of evolving as water tech ventures kind of like go more globally?
So something we're seeing at the moment in Canada when we talk about decarb, the value's there, but still secondary value proposition. Whereas some countries, particularly Australia, where I was living up until last Wednesday, you're beginning to see some clients, particularly utilities, begin to pursue products on the basis of their carbon impacts alone. What at the moment in Canada, we're still quite focused on, I guess, some more primary drivers, costs, often via labor. Or compliance in particular, you know, making sure that you're not having non-compliant discharges at the wastewater side of things. And these drivers are also present in other markets. So, you know, Australia is one that labor resonates quite well when we're talking to facilities down there that are quite excited about the fact that we can help them make quicker decisions without so many manual calculations. Whereas that might be a flip side somewhere like the Middle East, where labor is less of a driver, but water is scarce, and therefore things like reducing water losses through decreased backwashes have a pretty fair appeal. So it's all about sort of recognizing these things all connect, but that might mean something quite different to someone else, and making sure that, you know, your PANI in our scenario might be right for a different facility for a different reason, but that doesn't mean that they can't get those other values. It's just that that is less pressing and less urgent for the time being.
Any of the other panelists want to chime in?
I'll say, you know, what's driven some of we have a few international installations and lots of inquiries is very similar to Jeff's experience, but you may have in Canada, there are livestock and dairy operations that have been around for years and may have local nutrient issues and want to do right thing by efficiency and water, et cetera, on their operations. Whereas internationally, you're looking at places that are going to get shut down livestock taken away, reduced numbers if they can't get nutrient and land balanced, which obviously is a direct water issue because those nutrients find a way to go when they have no home in the soil. So we're seeing all these pressures heightened outside of Canada. I mean, that's pretty obvious to say, but we're really, I think generally as Canadians, quite unaware of how much pressure different parts of the world are under when it comes to still producing food, handling water every day for the shower, toilets, and just getting up and going to work. So those are benefits for growing Canadian technologies, but then you have the added intricacies of how many languages do you put your operations manual in? How do you get it installed? How do you ship it? So great opportunities because they really focus us anyway on our core, back to what our core systems the reason we built the systems is to manage a lot of these things, but they create interesting other business challenges.
Yeah, I double down on that, Doug. It's about opportunity, and it's about defining the pain points of your customers, and then you can look globally and see where those pain points are the most acute. And even just looking to the US, different states, different prices of electricity, different labor costs, you can really figure out, well, that's the state that I need to be focused on. It's California, it's wherever. So yeah, it's being able to identify that, define it, and then you can go after it globally.
I would echo what Pat says. Find in our case, it's finding areas where water scarcity, government reuse mandates, water and energy costs are higher, where people will get it. Essentially, where there's also environmentally consciousness, or they've been so restricted, and so they're open to new technology that will solve that problem. I think Canada, there definitely are pockets, in particular, for our technology that we're focused on, but it's really about, for us, been finding those areas where it's an easier sell, and then hopefully we'll be able to come back and really work across Canada when things have changed, and we're a few years later on.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to our lovely panelists that were able to join us today. I feel like this is a kind of conversation that could go on for hours, but unfortunately we only had 1 hour today. Once again, thank you so much, Alicia, Patrick, Jeff, and Doug for joining us on this panel. It was fantastic to hear from you and the work that you're doing. And thank you to all of our attendees who joined in, as well as were part of the Q&A session. Maybe I can hand it over to Alan for closing remarks as well.
Oh, that's it from my end. Stay tuned. We'll have updates coming on our experience with UN Water Conference here. Stay tuned for updates from all 4 of the companies. I know at least one of them is announcing something big this week. So hopefully more coming on that. And otherwise, this water-climate intersection, I think, is only a space that we're going to be hearing more and more about. So really encouraging everyone on the call to continue to make those connections, and we definitely will in our court. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. Thanks, panelists, and thanks, Benita, for moderating.